QSO Today, episode 531, Norm Cantin, WA1NLG. This episode of QSO Today is listener-sponsored. Please become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor banner on the show notes page or at the top of the QSOtoday.com webpage. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth, amateur call sign 4Z1UG, where I demonstrate the diversity and relevance of the amateur radio hobby and its impact on society by interviewing ham radio operators, many of whom played vital roles in shaping our technology through the amateur radio hobby. And while many people might say, ham radio? Do people still do that? This podcast demonstrates through in-depth interviews just how amazing, diverse, and dynamic the amateur radio hobby continues to be. I know that's been more than a few weeks since I last posted an episode of QSO Today. I took for granted that the runway that I had created for over a 10-year period of time that kept my guest list active with new guests every week was something that I lost over the 7-month period when I was gone. So now only about 5% of the invitations that I send out get answered, leading to an interview. Combined with my complicated health issues and the health issues of my XYL and other family members, it has been almost impossible to get it together to publish a new episode. Half of every day is spent working on my physical health, and while cancer is in remission, the effect of the osteoporosis has left me struggling to breathe and standing upright for only short periods of time. I love doing this podcast since its beginning. It has enriched my life from the hams that I have met along the way. I know that I got to know some of the smartest people alive. What a gift it has been to learn from my guests. I can no longer promise regular interviews on QSO Today. As I record them, I will post them. I have over 500 QSO Today Virtual Ham Expo presentations that need to go to YouTube from my Vimeo channel, and I hope to move them there, with introductions as time permits. For the first time in over 50 years, I'm back on the air with my new IC7300, and while not thinking that I'd enjoy FT8 or the other digital modes, I find it almost addicting with me doing just one more contact on any of the bands from 30 to 6 meters. I love seeing on PSK Reporter where I'm being heard and what I'm hearing with my random length inverted V and antenna tuner at the bottom. I'm also using VAR AC for chatting and enjoy all of its new features, including the use of AI and its email gateways over HF. Try to work me on one of these bands and modes. Norm Cantin, WA1NLG, discovered amateur radio through the Boy Scouts at the age of 14. Since then, Norm's interest in radio and electronics led him through a rich career in engineering, working with LORAN and GPS navigation systems, eventually leading to contributing to the creation of Iron Dome and Patriot anti-ballistic missile systems. WA1NLG loves just about everything ham radio has to offer and has a new interest in EME or moon bounce QSOs. Norm, WA1NLG, is my QSO Today. WA1NLG, this is Eric, 4Z1UG. Are you there, Norm?
I am. Good morning, 4Z1UG, WA1NLG. How are you today, Eric?
Good afternoon, Norm. I'm great. Thank you so much. Norm, thanks for joining the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Well, when I was young, I don't know, about 8 or 9, I was fairly mechanically inclined, and I used to love to take things apart like vacuum cleaners and try and fix them for various neighbors and stuff, and actually turned it into a little business. But what really got me going was Boy Scouts. I was involved with Boy Scouts, and my radio merit badge, you had to learn Morse code. I always liked to tinker, so it became kind of a natural thing. It turned out the scout leader was a ham, and he offered classes beyond the radio merit badge for us, and several of us took up that class, and I actually earned my technician license back in 1969. I think I was 14 years old, yeah. And one of the reasons was we'd go to summer camp with the Boy Scouts. I was Camp Resolute in Bolton, Massachusetts. I grew up in Framingham. And one of the things he would do is bring an old Lafayette 6-meter AM portable radio, a transceiver, and he would link back home and do phone patches for the Scouts. And I thought that was really cool. And that's why I got my technician license versus my novice, so I could get on 6 meters. And that became my favorite band. And to this day, it's my favorite band. And I am pursuing the Fred Frisch Memorial Award as part of that. So after getting my technician's license.
Before we move on, you mentioned the Fred Frisch Memorial Award, right? Fish? Okay. Mm-hmm. And that's, I saw that there's a map on your QRZ.
Yes.
And so each of those green squares is the grid square location or a grid square area that where you've talked to somebody or you've actually gone to each of these locations.
You talk to that person. So the idea is there's 488 grids in the U.S. in the lower 48, and to get all those grids is quite something. And Fred Fish was the first one to do that back some years ago. And I think it's up to maybe 60 folks have done that to date. And the map I put up on my webpage is just an indication of the grids. All the green ones are ones that are confirmed. So I think I'm up to 376 or something like that. So still have a ways to go. But
for the ones that are not showing green yet, where there may not be anybody living perhaps in that grid square, is there a way, is there an organization or even a chat page so that people know to go to those squares to see if they can actually work a lot of people that are needing that grid square?
Absolutely. There's a number of rovers, and there's a community of them through various bulletin boards. There's an active list of the Fred Fish Award tracking that one of the local hams has and publishes each week. There is also web pages you can go to track these rovers. They're typically roving during the hot season for 6 meters, which is the summer, May through June, July, that time frame. And that's typically when you pick up more of your grids. Being on the East Coast here to get to the Midwest and so forth, you need double hop to get there. So you need good conditions, and that's typically in the summer. Sometimes late fall, you'll get a day or two. What I actually do is I monitor 6 meters with WSJT X, and I've actually run 8 instances of it on different frequency and different modes. And I use a program called JT Alert to track grids I have, and then ones I don't, it will send an alert. And I've written a script file, and I use an application called Pushover that pushes a message to me. So if a grid comes up that I need, no matter where I am, I'll get a notification, and I'll connect remotely into my computer and go after that grid, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. But it's a lot of fun.
And so can you use a multiple of modes in order to get this award?
Yeah. Some of them are on sideband, some are on CW. To be honest, a lot of them are on FT8 now, and some on Q65. I actually have one moon bounce contact on 6 meters. We can get into that later because that's my new passion is moon bounce. But I've been successful with one moon bounce contact so far.
So Boy Scouts was the initiator. It seems to me that I've had a lot of guests that have had, got their start in the Boy Scouts, but I think you're the first that actually had somebody in the Boy Scouts who kind of took you beyond the radio merit badge and actually into the technician license. Was that WA1NLG the call sign that you got then?
Yep, it's my original call, and I've kept it ever since. I thought about getting a vanity call, but I've had it so long. It's 56 years now, so I just couldn't give it up.
Okay, so you're a ham radio operator as a teenager. Did you have a radio club at your high school in those days? It seemed to me there was a lot more hams that were kids, as I remember.
Yeah, that was probably the boom time. The 50s and 60s, I think, were the boom time for kids and ham radio. No, we didn't have one at our high school. However, I joined the Framingham Radio Club, and we had great mentors there, our Elmers. And actually, the first one was my scout leader. His call was WA1ETX. He's now a silent key. He was also my dad's cousin. So that he lived, I don't know, a couple blocks away. And he was also in the TV repair business. So I started learning how to repair TVs with him at, 14 years old. And that really kept me going, and actually was part of my career was ham radio. Really got me connected to folks through the ham community. I actually became the president of the Framingham Radio Club. I think I was 19 years old. And it It was really, really big and active at the time. My first field days were with the Framingham Radio Club, and very fond memories. And I think the passion that they showed back then really came to bear on me. And I've been at it ever since, and I really enjoy it.
Did ham radio play a part in the choices that you made for your education and career after high school?
Yeah, I wanted to become an electrical engineer. I went to Worcester Polytech. But what happened just before that, one of the hams had begun a company with another gentleman, and this was in 1972, and the company was called North Star, and they developed Loran A back then, and then Loran C, and then GPS navigation systems. They needed a technician, so I was hired in my senior year of high school, and I had planned to go into the Air Force because I couldn't afford college, so I was going to go into the Air Force, and this allowed me to work and go to school at the same time. So I went to school. I would schedule my classes in the morning, drive to work, and that was at the Civil Air Terminal at Hanscom Field. They had a one-room shop. There were three of us, and we built the company up to, I think, about 150 people. And I learned so much from that experience. I learned what I did is I worked on analog switching power supplies and receivers for the Loran systems. And I learned so much from Mark, my second mentor, WA1NLG, who was the one that hired me into the company. And to be honest with you, I learned more there than I did at college.
Before we started, I was remarking that Norm has beautiful electric wiring behind him in the picture I'm looking at right now. And so did the attention to detail, was that something you've always had, or is that something that you kind of gained along the way?
No, that's actually one of the reasons I was hired, is because I could build things so well. I had built a number of Heath kits. I started out with a shortwave radio my dad bought me. I think it was a GR64, but I'm not sure of the model number, but it was a Heathkit shortwave radio. And my first amateur radio was a Gonset 6-meter Goonie box, the Gonset communicator. I wanted to get on the low bands, but I couldn't afford a Drake or a Collins. And Heathkit came out with their SB102, and I bought that. My dad bought me the power supply and speaker to go with it, and I built that up. And you'll see a picture on my webpage of me at probably 15 or 16 with that radio, which I still have here today and operate.
And was that the same radio that your Boy Scout troop leader also brought to summer camp?
He brought a portable Lafayette. It was 6-meter only, AM transceiver, battery operated. I think it maybe had 5 or 10 watts output, and he had a Clegg, I think a 66er back at his house. So we were going from Framingham to Bolton, which is probably, as a crow flies, 15 miles. And we would set up a 3-element Yagi at the camp. And then he had, I think, a 5-element on his tower. And there was no problem communicating. And we all loved it because we could call our parents and tell them what was going on. And it was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was always my dream as a young kid, was a suitcase phone at camp, something like that. Like maybe more, a shoe phone like Maxwell Smart,
would
have at camp, because none of the other kids would have that. Well, that's great. Yes. Okay, so what happened after that? You got your engineering degree. You have all of this work experience. What happened along the way then? Where did it take you?
Well, I was with North Star from 1973 to 2000. We originally started with Loran A and developed those systems, and that was using discrete logic, TTL logic. We developed the first automatic Loran C with an 8080 processor, a microprocessor. So I was involved with the power supply design for that and the receiver design for that. And others, we had, by then we were up to, I think, about 15 people. And that was in the mid 70s. This was for marine use. But also at the time, you could have spotter planes, which would spot schools of fish. Should back up a little bit. We started the company mostly for the commercial industry. The way it started is the founder, Charlie Malachias, lived in Provincetown, which is a big fishing community. They were using surplus Loran receivers from World War II called APN-9s, and you'd have 2 dials on them, and you'd match the pulses up and read the line of position off the dial, which is a delay, basically a time delay. And you do that for two stations, and you'd cross them and look on the map, and that's where you were. Well, that was hard for them to use. Most of them didn't even speak English. They were all Portuguese. So Charlie had the idea of building an automatic one that would read out the line of position. So that's how the company started. And Mark, WA1MFY, was the analog engineer he got together with to start the company and build the receiver and power supply for that. That was done on credit cards, and you'd build them. And what we would do is design during the day and build at night. We'd have at that time, my girlfriend, who is now my wife, helped build kits of parts into boards. And we would take those and assemble them at the shop and age them on an aging rack for a week and then ship them. And we'd have to do all that fast enough to pay off the credit card and then eventually bootstrap up, because banks wouldn't talk to us back then. We did successfully build the company. We did get some investments from some of our dealers. We didn't have a salesman for the first 10 years. We all did the sales ourselves. Our motto was, if we design the product to be easy to use, it will sell itself. Well, it was really a lot of word of mouth from the commercial fishermen in Provincetown, then New Bedford, and then on the West Coast out in Seattle, which fed a lot of the Alaskan king crabbers and things of that nature. So word spread that our system worked, and we sold a lot to the commercial industry. That eventually worked its way into the sports fishing community, and we started outfitting sports fishing vessels and then yachts and mega yachts over the years. Northstar became the leader in Loran for performance and ease of use. And we then got into aircraft. We started developing Loran for aircraft use, and that was called the Model 1, the M1. And that was a big hit. So we always put performance and ease of use as our number one priorities, and then reliability. So we became known for that, and the company grew. In fact, it grew to the point where Raytheon took notice, and Raytheon was involved in high seas, which are the big ships that go across the ocean, and they wanted to get into commercial fishing. So we actually private labeled the RayNav systems before eventually there was a buyout, and they bought all their equipment from JRC in Japan. But for about 10 years, we manufactured Lorans for Raytheon, which is interesting because I'll get to it later. I ended up going to Raytheon years later. From Northstar, we actually sold the company in 1989, I think, to Canadian Marconi. They had GPS technology. We had been working on GPS technology with Motorola up until that point, but we wanted something higher performing and smaller. And Canadian Marconi had developed GPS systems for commercial aircraft. They were supplying all the aircraft, the Boeing 0007s with their GPS systems. So there was an opportunity to take that technology and miniaturize it. They also owned GE Plessey at the time in the UK, and they actually manufactured the chips. So we were able to develop GPS and bring it down to 2 chips back then, and integrate it into our Loran. So we'd have GPS and Loran, and then got into GPS and got into mapping software and more like modern systems you'd buy from Garmin today. And we actually, interesting story, Gary Burrell, who started Garmin, worked for Allied Signal, and they actually tried to buy our company, and the CEO wouldn't do it. So he went off and started Garmin. And a bit of trivia, Garmin's first name was ProNav, and that turned out to be another company's name. So they changed it to Garmin, and the Gar is from Gary, and the Min is from the chief engineer, Min. So that's how Garmin got its name. So a little trivia there.
Well, that's really cool. Is Loran still being used as a navigation tool?
It is in Europe, actually, but the U.S. decommissioned it some time ago and felt GPS is good enough. But GPS is a fine system. It's become like the clock has years ago, and it's integrated into everything. But it's very easy to jam. In the early days, TV stations caused a lot of problems if the receivers weren't designed properly. So we always felt Loran and GPS was a great combination. We actually developed a system for aircraft, and we did the first Cat 3 approach to Hanscom Field, which is basically a hands-off landing back in, that had to be the not even that, late 80s, early 90s, somewhere around that time frame. So we really thought the combination was the way to go. But the government cut the funding, and LORAN has been off the air for quite some time in the U.S.
And was there a lot of pushback, I would think, from the industry? It seems to me that, at least we know here, that sometimes your Waze or your Google Maps doesn't work because of interference.
Yeah.
That seems like that'd be very disconcerting if you're trying to land a plane, on a wire, I guess they call it, and that wire breaks or it has a different location in it. Are there alternatives to do GPS then? Maybe in the old school?
There is GLONASS, which is the Russian system, which is very similar to GPS. And in fact, we developed systems that would take both. But we felt satellite-based and ground-based was a better combination, LORAN being the ground-based system. I think it cost about $20 million a year for the U.S. to maintain it. So I think it was short-sighted. There was a lot of industry pushback, but GPS had taken off, the price had come down, and people accepted it. One of the issues with GPS in the early days was a system called selective availability. The GPS signal was purposely distorted for commercial use. Military had access to another phase of it that would give them better precision. The way we got around that is we developed differential GPS. There used to be these Coast Guard beacon stations that used to broadcast a signal and you home in on those. Well, those were abandoned. They got repurposed to send differential corrections, and we designed a differential receiver that would receive these beacon signals and apply the correction to the GPS locally. So even with selective availability, we were getting accuracy of about a meter. Nowadays, with survey grade, you're down to millimeters of GPS accuracy. It's quite incredible.
If GPS is being jammed, for example, do these differential stations have any effect in terms of actually giving you back your accuracy once more? Or are you out of luck?
You're out of luck, although there is, with the aircraft, of course, there's a whole bunch of landing systems and other systems that the aircraft use that allow them to land without GPS. I don't think there's a lot of jamming in that environment. There was a little bit of that in the early days. The Russians were making available these little jammers, and the signal coming from the satellites is very weak, so it's easy to jam them. I did have a lot of exposure later on in Raytheon to the military side of it, and there are techniques to take care of that in a large degree, which I can't go into, but there are techniques.
Okay, very good. And it sounded to me like as you were with North Star, you kind of went up the ladder, from 3 men in a single room to a much larger company. Did you become one of the management in the company?
Yeah, actually, I was an owner. 7 of us, as we got a little bigger, we issued stock, so 7 of us owned it. I became the vice president of engineering. I had started the manufacturing part. I was vice president of manufacturing and then became vice president of engineering. Was interim CEO for a little while when we sold the company, and then they brought in their own guy. I stayed until 2000. I had been heavily recruited to another startup who was an avid boater who was familiar with North Star, and he was starting a company called Outerlink, where we were providing satellite tracking for high asset vehicles, things like air ambulance, helicopters, and planes. We outfitted back then it was called Mass Electric, the local electric utility, all their bucket trucks. They wanted a way to track them, so we developed a GPS receiver for that, and then a telemetry system to the satellites using spread spectrum, bouncing off of satellites, a bent pipe satellite to Earth station, and then it would come back to them and they'd display it on a map. Well, interesting story there. At first, the linemen didn't like it because they were being tracked. And back in those days, things were a little looser. So they'd end up smashing the antennas off the truck, would have an accident. Until one day, it had a feature that we called Code Blue. And the linemen, a lot of these trucks, it was a single lineman on the little bucket truck, and he had a little button look like a pager on his belt. Well, if you push that button, it would send a Code Blue signal, an emergency signal to the dispatcher. Well, one day a lineman managed to zap himself, was conscious enough to push the button. Well, after that, they loved it. Everybody wanted it. So it was an interesting story. We did that startup, and that was a venture capital-backed startup. And during the wireless, the .com crash, we got bundled up in that, even though we weren't cellular or the other wireless. they pulled the funding on us. So that ended that. We were probably 6 months from break even, which is after 3 years of a company, that's pretty good. And that's when I went to Raytheon. I've been recruited to Raytheon to come in and do advanced development and modernize Patriot and the air defense system, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And I should have noted up front, I'm very happy to see that the hostages are back and that all of that has happened. But I was involved with Iron Dome and the modernization of Patriot for 13 years.
Wow. Well, we thank you for that. It's, after 30,000 rockets from Gaza, Iron Dome played a hefty part in keeping Israelis safe from the rockets that were being fired from Gaza.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, and the other stuff, I guess I'll have to comment some other time and not here on what's happening. But we're also delighted to have our hostages home, the live hostages, that is, and
Yes.
And their families. I think we're all sighing a breath of relief, at this
Yep.
point after 2 years. During this whole period of your professional life, were you active in ham radio at the same time? Did you, maintain that? And how do you see your ham radio operating, perhaps more for change over time?
Well, yes, I mostly active, very active until we had kids back in 1980. I always had a 2-meter radio in the car. I always had a ham station at the house, and our kids grew up in a suburb called Westford, Massachusetts. So I had a big tower there and lots of radios. But the kids weren't really interested in radio. They got really interested in computers. So we spent a lot of time building computers and going to computer shows. And my ham radio kind of fell off a little bit, other than the 2-meter operation from mobile. So it was maybe 10 years, 15 years of less activity. But when I get back into it, I noticed a lot of changes. SDR radios were coming out. A lot of the technology had advanced, and I hadn't really paid attention too much to the radio technology because I was deeply in computers and networking and things of that nature. So I was really impressed with how technology had evolved. When I first started out, I'd do phone and CW. I actually did a lot of phone patches back in the early 70s for soldiers in Vietnam to my local town of Framingham. So I was pretty active in that. Learned CW, enjoyed CW, but that kind of fell off during the time that I was busy with computers. When I got back into it, as I said, the technology evolved a lot. So I started building a shack. We have retired on Cape Cod, where I am now. So I built a shack here and have populated it with quite a few radios and equipment. I love to build, so I've got a lot of test equipment, and I'll tell you about my projects in a few minutes. But I got back into it and started continuing my DXCC WAS on a number of bands. So I got very active on sideband and CW, and then discovered FT8, and I use that quite a bit. And I am now using the digital mode Q65 for moon bounce. So that's my new passion, is moon bounce. So I am currently building LNAs, low noise amplifiers, and TR switching for 2-meter moon bounce array. I have ordered 2 cross-polarized antennas that will be going up on a second tower I've installed here with azimuth and elevation control. So I'm very excited to get that on the air and hopefully be able to work moon bounce on a more regular basis. Prior to that...
What band are you doing moon bounce on?
Well, that array is for 2 meters. But I've also worked moon bounce on 6 meters, 1 2-way contact, using ground gain and pointing at, in my case, the setting moon. So from about 10 degrees or so down, I can typically transmit and people will hear me. My problem is I'm not hearing them. So I've got more work to do to put some LNAs up for 6 meters and also 220. I'm active on 220, which obviously is a US band, and I've had some moon bounce experience there where people can hear me, but I can't hear them. So I've got to work more on the receive side. I have also modeled my antennas. My antennas are too tight. I've got them spaced. I've got 5 antennas all within 8 feet, an 8-foot stack. So I've modeled that. If I separate them and raise them 20 feet, I'll pick up over 6 dB of improvement. So that's my next chore, is to take the antennas off the first tower, raise it 20 feet. So that'll get me up to 50 feet. 6 meters will be at 50 feet, which is kind of the sweet spot. I'll have ground gain and hopefully be able to work some moon bounce on 6 meters and then 220. And then with a 2-meter array that has elevation, that should work 2 meters quite well. So going in full bore.
Now, did I see that you have a 9700, the ICOM IC9700 for?
I do.
Yeah.
I have a lot of ICOMs.
But you could do moon bounce on 1.2 gigs. I understand that seems to be quite doable for people that are getting into moon bounce.
Yep. That'll be the next one. You need a fair amount of power, and you can probably see in the picture, I've built a number of linear amplifiers, and there are solid state amplifiers that are homebrew for 6 meters, 2 meters, 220, and then HF. And that gets back to my building I love to build.
Well, I saw the power amplifiers, and I was kind of curious because, it was your QRZ page was also, and some other research I was doing, tend to mention that you're a member of the Northeast Weak Signal group. Now,
Yes.
With the power amplifiers and the weak signal, what's the difference between running QRP and running weak signal? Is that something completely different?
No, it's weak signal in the sense that we're working high frequencies and doing things like moon bounce. So the path loss on moon bounce is about 250 dB. So you got a lot of gain to make up between antennas and power and receiver sensitivity. So that's the reason for the power. There are guys that have worked moon bounce with 100 watts. It's hard. You got to be very patient. Conditions have to be good, but it can be done. But 1,000 watts is kind of the place you want to be. Some folks have 1,500 watts, but these amplifiers with a single chip, I can do 1,000 watts. And I run them about 900 watts, and it'll transmit 60 seconds and receive 60 seconds. I put a fair amount of air through them, and they just keep going. And I do contests. I do the VHF contests, and they're running 24, 30 hours pretty much straight.
Regarding those amplifiers, you were doing a talk on adventures with linear amplifiers and how to build your own using LD MOS.
Yep.
I see that you used to do that. Are these amplifiers of your own design, or are they kit amplifiers, or what is it that you're building? They all look the same, but they all look pretty nice.
Yeah, so that is not my design. It is Jim W6QPL's design, and I've adapted it a little bit. He has done all the heavy lifting to make that design, and it's a fine design. So I mimic a lot of that. I do build my own cases. I buy sheets of aluminum, cut it, bend it. I have a bender here. And the front plates are actually, I do use a company that laser etches them. And the reason there's no screws on the front is they do blind tapping on the back. So those are 1/8-inch aluminum plate. But you can see on the webpage kind of what the construction looks like, and I try to keep them neat. And I build the pieces. Jim offers kits of parts. So I buy the RF deck parts from him and the transistor and the copper spreader, and then I assemble those. The rest of it I assemble as well. The only thing I buy built is a sequencer board. I don't have a pick and place machine, so it's hard to build those without one. So I do buy that assembled. But the rest is my handiwork.
So you could use, say, for the high voltage, which is what? High voltage is like 48 volts or something like that?
It's 50 volts.
50 volts.
Yep.
Would you use a commercial switching supply for that? You go to a switching supply vendor or do you build your own?
It's a combination. I bought these 20 amp bricks. They're 48 volt, 20 amp bricks intended for light, using on light assemblies, I guess. And I take those and I turn them up to 51 volts. I put 4 of them together, so I have 80 amps, and I put them through Schottky diodes just to isolate the power supplies from each other. And then I put a slow start on the input, so there's not a sudden surge. But they're commercial modules that I assemble into a power supply box, and they feed the amplifier. So I can run 2 amplifiers simultaneously on one power supply.
Wow. Okay, so the power supply is external to the amp.
Correct. Yeah, They're sitting on a shelf underneath the bench.
Oh, that makes good sense. I'm curious. It's my understanding that you received a proclamation from the governor of Massachusetts for volunteer work that you did for BARC. What is BARC, and what's the story behind the proclamation?
Boy, you did your homework. BARC stands for Barnstable Amateur Radio Club. And I was president for that club for 3 years, and part of the proclamation is we doubled the membership. So we went from about 70 to 140. But the big thing was we won a grant from the ARRL. You may recall that a couple of years ago, they had a grant of up to, I think it was $25,000. And we submitted a proposal to build a radio station at the Boy Scout camp here on Cape Cod. It's called Camp Greeno. And I spent a lot of time working on that, and we won it. In addition to that, I was able to work with some of the local vendors, wood suppliers that would supply building materials. We were able to get Comcast to donate 5,000 feet of fiber optics so we could wire the camp up. And as it turned out, when we built this radio station, we were building a room in the basement of one of their buildings, and it was a walkout basement. And it turned out the whole back wall was all rotted out, and the floor was sagging. So this turned into a much bigger job. So I brought my brother in and a bunch of jacks, and we jacked the back of the building up and repaired it all for him. And the local lumber yards were nice enough to donate the beams that we used. So we rebuilt the whole back of the building and built the radio room in there. So that's what I won that proclamation for, is doing that. But it wasn't just me. It was a lot of guys pitching in, put a lot of hours into it. And in fact, we will be there this weekend for a Jamboree on the Air.
Oh, well, that's pretty cool. I was going to ask you, it seems to me that a Boy Scout camp has seasonal use. Is the Boy Scout camp actually more than seasonal use, so there's enough hams going in and out of there to use the radio room, or it has remote capability? Do Boy Scouts have access to the remote capability of that station if they're local members or something like that?
Yeah, so the camp is open year-round, although there's not a lot of activity in the winter, but there is some. They have winter camping expeditions. The radio station is available to them. We just had the grand opening about 3 months ago, and we have got some involvement with the hams. We had, to be honest with you, the Cub Scouts were more interested than the Boy Scouts. It seems as though the younger kids that haven't been exposed to cell phones too much are attracted to it. And they're attracted to, interestingly, Morse code and satellites. And anything like that is eye candy for them until they get into cell phones. So we had a fair amount of interest from the Boy Scouts. We have, a number of us have become merit badge counselors. So we're in the process of setting up a radio merit badge in the hopes that that will encourage the Scouts to become hams. So we're at the beginning of that road, if you will. However, Bark has been very involved in licensing hams. I think we've done about maybe close to 30 this year. Some of them as young as 14, through a number of efforts. I personally, with others, go to maker fairs and have a booth to show off ham radio. We go to Mass Maritime Academy here on Cape Cod, has a summer program where they bring middle schools students in that are high achievers. And each year we put on a presentation at night. And from that, we've got a few feeders. We go to the local schools, rod and gun clubs, and things of that nature. So we've actually licensed a number of police officers and firemen. It turns out we have a weather net on our repeater, the Bark repeater, every morning at 6 a.m. And the fire chiefs listen to that. We didn't know that at first, but we've learned that, and we're able to get them interested, and a number of them have become licensed radio amateurs.
How is ham radio received at the maker fairs that you go to? And what is it that you show, other than you're not showing Morse code, or maybe you are?
Oh, yeah, we do. We actually bring a code practice oscillator, and we print up little cards with the Morse code on it, and then I'll have each of the kids send their name in Morse code. So they like that. But to be honest, the big draw at a lot of these fairs is the robotics. That's the big thing these days. So we explain to them that radio is part of robotics because that radio link you're using uses radio frequencies. So you get some interest, and I can't say we've licensed any hams from that, but my opinion is the more you can expose people, the more likely you're going to get somebody interested, and you'll see this, the light go off. So I think we've licensed probably a handful of kids under 18. So we think that's good. And then there's another group that's in their late 30s, early 40s that's become involved because quite honestly, most of our club members are, probably north of 60.
Right. And I guess young people are finding that YouTube is not a hobby. I guess it could
Yes.
be. Yeah, right. But
Yeah, I spend a lot of time with my grandkids doing STEM, exposing them to the radio. I actually had my granddaughter on. We were down here one night and she wanted to listen to the radio, so I turned it on. And the Indianapolis Speedway had a special event station on, and it happened to be a woman. So I called her back, and then I got my granddaughter on, and they chatted for a couple minutes. So that was, you could see her eyes light up when that happened. So I'm working on exposing them to STEM and hopefully get them licensed in the future.
do you have your grandchildren surround you on the workbench? I mean, are workbench projects something that you do with them? And what kind of workbench do you have?
Well, the workbench is got a lot of test equipment. There's a couple of pictures of it in my QRZ page. So there's the traditional things like oscilloscopes and frequency counters and generators. And then I've actually acquired recently a noise figure meter that I'm using for these LNAs and, voltage, VTVM and things of that nature. I involve them at the workbench, but it's usually fixing something of theirs, one of their toys, like their camera or their radio or radio-controlled car, something like that got dropped. I also do a lot of projects with wood. So we've built a few things together. Like I built a small dollhouse for my granddaughter. I built a tree fort for my grandson at his house. So we do those kinds of projects together. They haven't learned how to solder yet, but that'll be in the offering.
And what project do you have on your bench right now?
Well, right now there's the low noise amplifiers for 2 meters that's there. And I'm working on that and working on getting the noise figure down. And I think I've been successful now. So I need to button that up and put that back up on the tower. And I should have my new antennas in about 2 weeks. So I'll be anxious to put those together and hopefully get them up before the bad weather hits.
And now this mid-show break. Every 2 weeks, I listen to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast with George, KJ6VU, Vince, VE6LK, Mark, N6MTS, Thomas, K4SWL, Michael, VA3MW, and Rod, VA3ON, and their guest on often topical and important projects in amateur radio. This discussion amongst the regulars and their guests remind me of the conversations that I used to listen to on 146.94 and 146.46 megahertz in Orange County, California, while working on my own workbench almost 50 years ago. It is amazing how much practical ham radio knowledge that we can absorb by listening to the Workbench podcast that starts to make sense when we start our own deep dive into our own projects. So join me by listening to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast now and as George and crew push beyond 200 episodes. You can get to the Ham Radio Workbench podcast by clicking on the banner in this week's show notes page. And now, back to our QSO. Now, you said you're retired. Does that mean you're completely retired, or do you still do some consulting?
It's interesting. Yes, I am fully retired, but I keep getting requests for consulting, and I respectfully say I am retired. I am busier now than I was when I was working, and I was pretty busy back then. But I kind of drew a line in the sand. I retired just before our first grandchild was born, and I really want to spend as much time with them as I can. My wife especially wants to do that. So they used to live in California, and when the pandemic hit, they lived in West Hollywood, and it got pretty crazy there. So they were outgrowing their apartment. They had their second child, and they decided to have a road trip. So they rented an RV and drove cross country. And their plan was to spend 6 months with us on the Cape and 6 months with her folks who live up in the Berkshires. And the two families convinced them that they should stay in the Berkshires. So they ended up buying a house in Lenox. And now we drive out there quite often to visit them. And I buy a lot of STEM kind of related electronics, various electronic kits, robotic kits, erector set kinds of things, Legos, lots of Legos. Mm-hmm. My grandson was very big into it, and now my granddaughter is getting into it. So trying to steer them in those directions.
Wow. Okay. And do you calendar your time in order to have time for all the projects and the operating and everything else you do? Do you hold it to a calendar? Do you manage your time, or do you just kind of see how the day presents itself?
I kind of do both. We do have calendar events. My wife and I share a calendar. And that is for things, like when we're going to visit the kids or special events, all those kinds of things, vacations, what have you. But the rest of the day is kind of how it evolves. I'm typically an early riser, and I'll come down, get on the radio a little bit or listen and putz around the workbench. My wife and I will have coffee together and maybe catch the news. But she's very, very supportive of my ham radio. So anything I do with that, especially if it's, here or with, the local guys or the guys come over here, she knows most all the hams and recognizes their voices because she hears them on the radio and of course meets them in person. But it's a combination of the two, kind of a long answer, but anything critical is on the calendar, but we still have plenty of free time. We live near the water here, so we're right by the beach. 5 houses back from the ocean. So when the grandkids are here, usually for about 5 weeks in the summer, we do a lot of beach time. I paddleboard a lot to stay in shape. I ride bikes. I spin bike in the winter. Well, I spin bike all year, but I road bike during the good weather. And we do a lot of outdoor activities during the good weather. And then, of course, in the winter, we're inside.
In the winter, it's cold, I would imagine, right, on the Cape?
Yeah, we, being close to the ocean, the wind shifts to the northeast and you get the cold air coming across the ocean. So it gets very windy down here, very cold, typically not a lot of snow, but pretty biting cold with that wind.
So you can, I guess the weather then it will drive you inside, and that's the great time to do the workbench projects, more things like that?
Yes.
More operating,
yep. And we travel some. We like to go out and visit we'll spend probably a total of 5 weeks visiting our grandkids each year. Between Christmas and New Year's, we spend the week with them. We actually rent an apartment nearby and have Christmas there every year with them. And like I say, during the summers, they're here. But we're finding life is getting faster and faster. So that's driving us to do those things more and more.
Yeah, that seems to be what happens is, at least for me, I find that the day is over when I'm just starting to figure out, what the day's about. So, yeah, the time is flying. Do you operate portable? Do you take any of your ham radio operation down onto the beach itself or to parks?
No, I haven't done that. That might be a good idea. I do, do field days and things like that. And we do a number of the local festivals they have in the area. So we set up ham radio at the Cranberry Festival, which is big here. We do other festivals. We also do a lot of there's road races down here. The Falmouth Road Race is a big popular race, the Cape Cod Marathon. So we provide communications for all the medical folks. And we actually set up stations at the local hospital and link all that together. So we do a lot of public service. I personally haven't done a lot of POTA, although there's actually a few of the new hams in the club that are younger are doing a tremendous amount of POTA. That seems to be another resident kind of activity for younger hams where they go out and activate the parks and that kind of thing. And I should do that. I've gone to the Marconi site. We activate that each year. So we do those things as club activity. So I do it as a club activity, but I don't do it personally.
So your amateur radio club presents itself to the festival organizers to provide communications. Wouldn't the pushback be that, well, we all have cell phones, that seems to be, we have that communication already. Is there something that ham radio operators provide? Maybe it's the experience and the understanding of how a festival or a marathon communication should be done that changes their mind? How does that work?
Well, a couple of things there. I always point out to these folks that, when the power goes out, you can lose communications. And on the Cape here, we've had instances where storms have come through, knocked out power, and then the cell phone system goes down after a while because a lot of them are just battery backed up. What we do during those situations through our Aries folks, part of our club, is we activate at the local shelters and we provide communication. So I point those stories out and tell them that if everything else goes down, ham radio still works. So we try to tell them about that. I think of ham radio as a hobby of 1,000 hobbies. So I tell them that ham radio provides a lot of community service, but it also provides opportunity for folks to do other things. If they like to build, they like to operate, they like to contest. So there's various aspects that you can engage in over your ham radio career. So we try to point out all of the activities that you can get involved in. But I think public service is how I try to resonate it with folks at these various festivals and so forth. And, we have a tower trailer with the tower and the antennas up there and right at the entrance. So you can't miss us. And we have a big banner up. So we are very engaging. So we'll see people go by and we'll kind of encourage them to see what we're up to.
Oh, okay. Well, it seems to me that, hams have, as you say, it's a hobby with 1,000 hobbies under the tent, in the tent with us. But the expertise that hams have in terms of passing messages or, just organizing first responders to an event like this seems to me that would be a real selling point, since most volunteers to these organizations probably wouldn't have that experience. So now you're giving me another interesting idea in terms of how to market ham radio as being something other than the old men in the basement. I guess there's still old men in the basement. I am. But there's probably something more to it. Do you think there's something that we could be doing that would better attract more hams or more young people to the hobby? It sounds to me like you guys you're on fire up there in terms of ideas and opportunities for non-hams to become hams. But have you thought about, is there something else that could be done that's not being done?
Well, we're always trying to think of things. We actually sent letters to all of the nursing homes and assisted living facilities here, thinking that maybe if we came and demonstrated ham radio, that would be something that some of the folks could, experience. And maybe there's some hams that are in these facilities. To be honest, we didn't get a lot of response. But we mailed to schools, and we did get one of the charter schools. One of the teachers got very interested, and she came and got her license, and one of her class members, I think she was 14, got her license. So we try to engage wherever possible. You bring up a good point about the operational skills, because that is something that is learned, and being able to operate the radio and coordinate the emergency activities is very important. So we promote those activities in the sense of making the awareness. We try to use all the local radio stations and newspapers to advertise these events. Sometimes they get in there, sometimes they don't. But we're always trying to find new avenues to reach different people. There are some women's group now that are popping up, and there's some interest in radio from these various groups, the newcomers groups and things like that. So we're reaching out to them. We actually have a committee that does that is constantly reaching out and sponsoring the classes. So we probably conduct 3 to 4 classes a year on demand. And we also will do licensing at the beginning of our meeting. We have license tests available. So a bunch of us are VECs, and we provide that capability. So a lot of times we'll have a test, somebody come in for a test before the monthly meeting. We also, as I say, sponsor whatever group is interested. We will accommodate them and conduct the licensing classes. And we have some very encouraging people within the ham community and within our club. So it's a very, very active club. We are a special services club, so we provide all those kinds of capabilities for the community.
Well, it sounds absolutely amazing. And it obviously is keeping you busy on one of the fronts that you have. And the grandparenting front is a great front to have as well. And with the hope that your grandchildren will find something that ignites their passion, throughout their life, and maybe it'll be something in the technology or in ham radio. What excites you the most about what's happening in ham radio now? If you had to choose one thing, if that's even possible, what excites you the most about ham radio now?
Well, right now it's the technical challenges of moon bounce. Being a retired engineer, I try to keep the gray matter going, so I'm always interested in the technology side. So that's really my passion now. But I also like to build, so that I'm surprised you found that little thing on the linear amps. So I offer my services and I mentor folks. We have a list of mentors, so I'm on that list. So I enjoy teaching folks. And when people first get their licenses, you get mic fright, so it's hard to get on the air. So we'll donate a 2-meter radio, a handheld to them, usually a Bofang, and give it to them and help them get on the air. So I'm active with that. We recently have started, we have a monthly meeting on Mondays, the first Monday of the month. The rest of the Mondays now we're conducting an Elma's net. So anybody that's new, we get them on the air and then we help them out on the air through this Elma net. And we just started that up this month, actually. So that's kind of our latest push on helping new hams out. Well, we do have a number of nets, and this repeater has a very good location. And as you're probably aware, the Cape is not very high; it's very flat. And we're actually up on a fire tower. And I mentioned earlier the weather net. So we conduct the weather net every day. We have weekly nets, and we try to promote the use of it for community service. So there are various walks and Alzheimer's walks, MS walks, things like that, where they use the repeater. A lot of us monitor. I've turned the volume down on mine now, but whenever I'm in the shack, the radio's on, or wherever in the car, the radio's on. And I try to respond to folks. We also have just recently installed, we're working on WA1NLG to link all of these nodes along the Cape for emergencies. And we just put some cameras up, part of the club. Some of the members there have led this effort to put cameras up. And one of the cameras is mounted on the fire tower, and it's connected to the fire department so they can have access to it. And they don't man the towers now, but they can virtually man it now with the camera we've installed for them. So we've set it up as a test to see what they think, and they like it. So we're going to expand that to more fire towers and then use those locations as WA1NLG nodes to connect the Cape and create a WA1NLG backbone. So we use that and the repeater site to say, here's the kinds of things we can do. A lot to public service officials now, and they're starting to get very involved. And as I mentioned earlier, some have got their license. So it's really not a silver bullet. There's lots and lots of things you have to do to encourage the use of the repeater. Fortunately, there are two big clubs on the Cape, our club and the Falmouth Radio Amateur Club. And we actually do events jointly. So a lot of the events, the two clubs get together, which I think is another way of exposing people to each other's clubs and making the repeaters available and what have you. So, there's a lot of cooperation that happens. We have each president goes to the other meeting and things of that nature. So we really try to work together and for the greater community.
Do you have advice that you'd give to newer returning hams to the hobby?
Well, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, it's the hobby of 1,000 hobbies. It's to get exposed to it and see what resonates. We have been finding that Morse code resonates, and getting the kids before they have cell phones available to them seems to be a good thing. Once they get the cell phone, it's hard to get them off it. So I would say go for the younger folks, expose them to it, show them all the facets, show them the public service side of it, show them things like satellite, because they like to see the antenna moving as it's tracking the satellite, hear the astronauts. And we do that quite often. And at JOTA this coming weekend, we will have a Cube satellite simulator there, which is pretty glitzy. And we have a light that's the sun, and there's telemetry so they can see that kind of stuff and those kinds of things. But I was surprised. Morse code seems to draw them in. So we're going to keep doing that and looking for more. But young and expose them to every facet, I think, is the way to go. And we're having some success, but, it's not like when I grew up where everybody was really going, wow, you can do that, because, cell phones didn't exist back then.
That's right. A lot of stuff didn't exist back then, which is quite amazing. Yes, it's hard to impress the kids these days with something like, radio on the one hand. On the other hand, every once in a while I get visitors to the shack and they kind of see all the knobs and everything and think that must be something to that. So anyway, Norm, it was such a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest on the QSO today. I've really enjoyed meeting you and I've enjoyed hearing your story. With that, I want to wish you 73 and thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Eric, and I enjoyed it very much, and nice to meet you, and 7-3.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Norm. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday and put in WA1NLG in the search box at the top of the page. You can sponsor the transcription of this episode or any of the previous episodes by clicking on the transcription button on every show notes page. The cost is $75 per episode, regardless of the length. We will quickly transcribe the episode and give you credit for your sponsorship. Please send us the call sign of the podcast to make sure that we transcribe what you want. Remember that QSO Today is value for value. Please support our project by making a donation or becoming a listener sponsor today. Use our Amazon link before shopping at Amazon, as we receive a small commission on your Amazon purchases. Subscribe to our mailing lists, both my blog and the podcast, and forward the messages to friends and family who would enjoy QSO Today content. Promote us on social media and give us a 5-star rating and reviews whenever you are asked. QSO Today is available on every podcast player and venue, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Podcasting 2.0. Get a Podcasting 2.0 player to make it easy to get your next episode as soon as we publish. My thanks to Ben Bresky, who, as the consummate artist, makes this host and his guests always sound brilliant. Ben also publishes a weekly Jewish history podcast. There is a link to that on the QSO Today homepage. Until next time, this is Eric for Z1UG 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.